Welcome back to Two Hearts, where stories are weaved to explore the beauty of diverse cultures and the depths of human connection. Photojournalist Sheree Michaels thought that capturing the raw beauty of Italy would provide her with some much-needed R&R, until she witnessed a gruesome crime along a dark Positano alley. Suddenly, she's not just a journalist, she's a target, hunted by ruthless men insistent on tying up loose ends. Her only hope is Wesley Drake, a former Special Forces operative with eyes as cold as the sea and a body built for protection. Unassuming and on holiday himself, he becomes the shadow compelled to shelter her, a man whose job is to keep her alive, but whose touch threatens to shatter her carefully constructed world. His is a world of violence and secrets, hers of truth and accountability. Yet neither can deny the immediate attraction and entrenched connection between them. To save her, Wesley must let Sheree go. But if he does the noble thing, who will save him? Please enjoy Escape from Paradise. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so that more members of our community continue to find content like this.
The sun beat down on Sheree Michaels' bare shoulders as she navigated the cobblestone streets of Positano, her camera clicking away at the pristine white buildings cascading down the cliffside. Its golden rays danced on the azure waters of the Mediterranean Sea that stretched endlessly before her. This solo vacation, her first in years, was supposed to be a reset, a chance to reconnect with herself after walking away from a job that disregarded her expertise, diminished her contributions, and disrespected her experience. Sheree had always been the type to plan everything meticulously. Her career as a freelance photojournalist demanded it, but this trip was her first spontaneous act in years. No itinerary, no obligations, just 10 days of pure indulgence in paradise. The resort was luxurious beyond her wildest dreams, with private villas nestled between lemon groves and cliffs overlooking the sea. Beautiful, isn't it? A voice beside her startled her from behind the lens. Sheree lowered her camera to find a local elderly woman smiling, her weathered face a roadmap of countless Italian summers. Absolutely breathtaking, Sheree replied, her voice carrying the warmth of her Louisiana upbringing. Come, the woman beckoned, gesturing toward a narrow alleyway. My art studio captures these same views. Despite her usual caution, Sheree found herself following, drawn by the promise of authentic wares beyond the tourist trail. The alley twisted between buildings, growing darker as they moved away from the main thoroughfare. Almost there, the woman called over her shoulder. As she wandered through the narrow streets, taking photos and admiring the leather goods or handmade pottery displayed on makeshift stalls, Sheree felt a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in years. The rhythmic lapping of waves against the shore and the rich aromas of fresh breads and seafood filled her senses and made her realize this was the escape she had been craving. Here, the woman stated, as she motioned to a quaint open-air shop filled with the beautiful artwork and ceramics that embodied the stunning Mediterranean views Sheree had just been capturing. As the woman took up her perch behind the shop's service counter, Sheree perused leisurely. She'd stepped outside to look at some of the larger pieces on the curb when she noticed some unusual activity in the alley running alongside the shop's outer wall. Two men stood with their backs to her, their posture rigid and menacing. Before them knelt a third man, pleading in a dialect that Sheree couldn't fully comprehend. Something about the scene felt wrong, terribly wrong. Her instincts kicked in and Sheree raised her camera, her focus sharpened despite the Mediterranean haze that had enveloped her since arrival. The kneeling man's voice grew more desperate, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. One of the standing men, broad-shouldered with a silver ring on each finger, reached into his jacket and withdrew something metallic that caught the sunlight. Cherie's breath caught in her throat as she realized what was about to happen. She couldn't look away as the man raised his arm, the glint of steel unmistakable. Click. The kneeling man's eyes widened in terror just before the first strike landed. Click. A sickening thud echoed through the alley, followed by another and another. Cherie's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp as blood sprayed across the brick wall behind the victim. The two assailants worked methodically, their movements economical and practiced. When they finished, one of them turned slightly, and Sheree found herself looking directly into cold, calculating eyes that seemed to pierce right through her disguise as just another tourist. Time froze as recognition dawned on his face. He had caught her watching. Panic seized her limbs, but years of controlling her reactions in volatile situations served her well. Sheree forced herself to turn slowly, casually, as if she hadn't witnessed anything at all. She set down the small ceramic plate she'd been examining, her fingers trembling uncontrollably beneath the facade of calm. "Scusi," she said to the vendor, her voice steadier than she expected. "I think I left my wallet at the hotel." Each step away from the alley felt like walking on eggshells. She kept her pace measured, refusing to break into a run until she had rounded the corner toward the busy market and out of their direct line of sight. Only then did her training abandon her, replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. Sheree broke into a sprint, her sandals slapping against the cobblestones as she dodged through the crowd. Behind her, she heard shouts, angry, determined voices that spurred her forward faster. She didn't dare look back, knowing that seeing them would only paralyze her with terror. The market became a blur of colors and sounds as she pushed past tourists and locals alike. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a frantic drum signaling her impending capture. She had to get away, had to disappear into the safety of her resort before they could. She collided with something solid, something that sent her stumbling backward with enough force to knock the air from her lungs. Strong hands shot out to steady her, gripping her arms with surprising gentleness despite their size and power. "Whoa, easy there," a deep voice rumbled above her. Sheree looked up into the most striking face she had ever seen. Piercing blue eyes, a strong jaw dusted with dark stubble, and a thin scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He was massive, at least 6'4", with broad shoulders that strained against the fabric of his black t-shirt. He looked dangerous, like someone you crossed the street to avoid. Yet his touch was gentle, his thumbs brushing soothingly against her skin. "Are you all right?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Sheree opened her mouth to respond, but all that came out was a choked sob. The adrenaline that had carried her this far suddenly abandoned her, leaving her trembling uncontrollably. His eyes narrowed as they took in the terror etched across her features. Without another word, he wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close against his side as he turned them both away from the direction she'd been running. "Walk with me," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Now." Sheree didn't resist, couldn't resist, as he guided her through the crowd with purposeful strides. His presence was both intimidating and strangely reassuring, a fortress of muscle and determination that somehow made her feel safer despite the danger pursuing them. They moved swiftly through the market, his long legs eating up the distance as Sheree struggled to keep pace. Behind them, the shouts grew closer, more insistent. The man tightened his grip on her waist, pulling her through a narrow gap between two stalls and into a service corridor that led away from the main thoroughfare. "Who are they?" he asked, his eyes scanning their surroundings. "I don't know," she gasped, her lungs burning. "I saw something I shouldn't have." The man nodded as if this explained everything. "Hotel?" "Yes," she managed. "Paradiso Beach Resort." "Me too," he said, surprising her. "Come on." They emerged from the narrow corridor onto a quieter street where hotel transportation waited. Without hesitation, the man flagged down a shuttle, practically lifting Sheree into the vehicle before climbing in beside her. As the doors closed and the shuttle pulled away from the curb, she risked a glance back and saw the two men from the alley standing at the edge of the market, their eyes scanning the departing vehicles. "Keep your head down," her rescuer instructed, positioning himself to block her from view. "We're not out of this yet." The ride back to the hotel was a blur of coastal scenery and mounting dread. Sheree's mind raced with questions. Who were those men? Why had they killed someone in broad daylight? And most importantly, what would they do if they caught her? The man beside her remained silent but alert, his body coiled with tension as he watched the passing scenery. There was something about him, something beyond his imposing physique, that suggested he was no ordinary tourist. The way he assessed their surroundings, the military precision of his movements, the calculated calm in his expression, it all spoke of someone accustomed to danger. Minutes later, they were through the lobby and heading toward the elevators. Sheree's mind raced with questions about this stranger who had so seamlessly taken control of the situation, but exhaustion was setting in. "The name's Wesley Drake, by the way," the man said, as the elevator doors shut. "Sheree Michaels," she replied, leaning against the wall for support. "American?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Louisiana," she confirmed. "You?" "Colorado originally, though home is wherever the work takes me these days." The elevator opened on the 7th floor. Wesley led her down the corridor, stopping before a wide entrance at the end of the hall. He swiped his wrist fob and the door clicked open. "After you," he said, gesturing inside. Sheree stepped into what could only have been the presidential suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Tyrrhenian Sea, the late afternoon sunlight casting golden highlights across the marble floors. A spacious living area was furnished with plush cream sofas, while a fully stocked bar sat in one corner. "Wow," she breathed, taking in the luxury that made her standard room look like a broom closet. "Make yourself comfortable," Wesley said, moving to the bar. "Drink?" "Water, please." He handed her a crystal glass, his fingers brushing against hers. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her system, despite the circumstances. "Now," he said, leaning against the bar, "tell me exactly what you saw." As Sheree handed him her camera and recounted the scene in the alley, Wesley's expression remained unreadable. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Looks like you witnessed an organized crime hit," he finally said, popping out the memory card and handing the camera back to her. "And if I'm right, the syndicate in charge here won't take kindly to witnesses." "I need to call the police, the American embassy." "No," Wesley said, his voice direct and certain. He moved to the bar and poured a glass of a brown liquid, then sat back down across from her. "The local police here have complicated relationships with certain organizations. You call them, and you might as well invite your killers to tea." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The embassy? They'd put you in protective custody, which means a safe house with minimal security, while they figure out jurisdiction. You'd be a sitting duck." Sheree stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. "So what do I do?" "First," he said, handing her back the memory card, "you'll want to hide this somewhere secure. Second, you stay here, with me," he said simply. "I'll keep you safe until you can get home." "How can you—" "I have a particular set of skills," he interrupted, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Let's just say that keeping people safe, especially people who find themselves in trouble, is what I do for a living." Sheree searched his face, trying to understand this stranger who had so suddenly become her protector. "What kind of living is that?" "The kind that doesn't appear on business cards, the kind that pays for suites like this one." A knock at the door made them both freeze. Wesley held up a hand, signaling for silence as he moved toward the entrance. He peered through the peephole, then relaxed. "Room service," he said, opening the door to reveal a young man with a cart. "I ordered some food. You must be starving." Sheree hadn't realized how hungry she was until he mentioned it. As the attendant set up their meal on the balcony table, she studied Wesley's profile. There was something about him, something beyond his imposing physical presence, that commanded trust. "You're military, aren't you?" she asked once they were alone again. "Former," he confirmed, cutting into his grilled octopus. "What brought you to Campania?" she asked after a beat of silence, genuinely curious about the mysterious man. "A little R&R until my vacation was unexpectedly interrupted," he replied without malice. "Sorry about that," she said, though she couldn't bring herself to truly regret their meeting. "Don't be," he countered, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "Better than spending another evening alone with a book." The admission hung between them, an unexpected point of connection. Two people, alone on vacation, now thrown together by circumstance. "Why are you alone here?" Sheree asked, emboldened by his openness. Wesley hesitated, his gaze drifting out to sea. "My job, it takes a toll. Sometimes you need to remind yourself what peace feels like. What about you?" "My job, it made me choose between my morality and their comfort," she said through a tight expression. "This trip was meant to be a reset and to remind myself that when doing the right thing stops being a team sport, I can still do it by myself." Any woman who refuses to look the other way while outrunning armed men is capable of doing just fine on her own, he said, raising his glass in a toast. Sheree clinked her glass against his. "To unexpected adventures." "To unexpected adventures," he echoed, his blue eyes holding hers a moment longer than he'd intended. The sun began to set, decorating the sky with wispy clouds and gradient shades. For a while, they ate in comfortable silence, the tension between them slowly dissipating into some sort of strange camaraderie. "You know," Wesley said, breaking the silence, "we should probably establish some ground rules for our unplanned cohabitation." Sheree raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" "Rule 1, you don't leave this suite without me. Ever." "That's a bit controlling, don't you think?" "Under normal circumstances, absolutely. Under current circumstances, it's what's keeping you alive." She sighed, knowing he was right. "What else?" "Rule 2. No contact with anyone back home. No social media posts, no calls, no texts. They could be monitoring." "My mother will have a fit." "Better a fit than a funeral," he said bluntly. "Rule 3. Trust me, even when it doesn't make sense, even when it seems like I'm overreacting." "Fine," Sheree agreed reluctantly. "Now, why don't you take a shower? It might help you relax. There are robes in the bathroom, and I'll find you something to wear." Sheree nodded gratefully, suddenly aware of how grimy she felt. Dust from the market, sweat from running, and the invisible stain of witnessing something horrific. As she disappeared into the bathroom, Wesley slipped onto the terrace with a secure satellite phone, his expression hardening as he dialed. "Status report," he said when the call connected. A gravelly voice responded from the other end. "Drake, you're supposed to be on vacation, not playing knight in shining armor." Wesley allowed himself a small smile. "Funny, Martinez. What do you have for me?" "Your girl stumbled into something big," Martinez replied, his tone shifting to business. The men she described matched known enforcers for the Camorra, specifically the Casalisi clan. Wesley's jaw tightened. The Camorra was one of Italy's most powerful criminal organizations, notorious for their brutality and extensive reach. If Sheree had witnessed one of their hits? "Do they operate in this area?" Wesley asked. Extensively, Martinez confirmed. Tourism provides excellent cover for their operations. What about the victim? Local businessman named Angelo Rossi, rumored to have been cooperating with authorities. Looks like they sent a message. Wesley paced the length of the terrace, his mind racing. Options? Get her out of the country quietly, Martinez said without hesitation. We can arrange extraction in a few days. Private jet from Italy, then commercial to the States. Her passport should be sufficient. And if they find her first, Wesley posed. Then we have a problem, Martinez said, his voice flat. The Casalisi don't leave witnesses, Drake. You know that. Understood, Wesley replied. What's the team's status? Jackson's in Naples can be at your location in 2 hours. O'Malley's securing the extraction route. Chen is monitoring police frequencies for any chatter about the market incident. Martinez listed off efficiently. We're ready when you are. Tell Jackson to hold position for now, Wesley instructed. No point drawing attention to ourselves if we don't have to. I'll call if the situation changes. You got it, Martinez said, then paused. Hey, Drake, one literally falls into your lap, huh? You must have some kind of magnetic field for damsels in distress. Wesley smiled grimly. Just doing my job, Martinez. Keep me updated. Always, his teammate replied before disconnecting. Wesley stood on the terrace for a long moment, the weight of his responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. Sheree wasn't a client, she was an innocent bystander who had stumbled into something far beyond her comprehension, and now it was his job to keep her alive. The hot water cascaded over Sheree's body, washing away the physical evidence of her ordeal, but not the memory. As she lathered her skin with the hotel's luxurious citrus-scented soap, her mind replayed the scene in the alley, the pleading man, the glint of steel, the spray of blood. A sob escaped her lips, followed by another, until she was sliding down the tiled wall of the shower, her body racked with tremors. She didn't know how long she stayed there, but when she finally emerged, wrapped in a thick, fluffy robe, she felt marginally more human. The bathroom mirror reflected a stranger, her eyes wide with fear, her face pale beneath her golden brown skin. She took a deep breath, steeling herself before rejoining Wesley in the living area. He had changed into a white t-shirt that emphasized his muscular build and was standing on the terrace, his back to her as he spoke into a phone in low, urgent tones. Sheree couldn't make out his words, but there was no mistaking the authority in his voice. When he turned and saw her, he ended the call abruptly. Feeling better? A little, she admitted, accepting the dry clothes he offered, a simple t-shirt and drawstring pants that would have to do until they could retrieve her belongings. Who were you talking to? My team, he said simply, as if that explained everything. Your team? What team? Wesley sighed, running his hand through his short blonde hair. Look, there's no easy way to say this, so I'm just going to be straight with you. I used to be special forces. Now I do contract work, protection. Security consultancy, that kind of thing. Sheree's eyes widened. You're a mercenary? Private military contractor, he corrected gently. There's a difference. And right now, my team is using all intel available to neutralize this threat so we can get you home safely. She should have been frightened. This man was clearly dangerous in ways she couldn't comprehend, but instead, she felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Wesley wasn't just some random tourist who had stumbled into her nightmare. He was an operative equipped to handle it. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. As night fell, the suite grew quiet. Sheree found herself fighting sleep, afraid to close her eyes and see the man in the alley again. You should go to the guest bedroom so you can rest, Wesley said, appearing beside her on the sofa. Nothing's getting through that door without me knowing. I can't stop thinking about it, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. That man, his eyes were focused on me, even as he lay there with a bullet in his... Hey, Wesley said gently, covering her hand with his. Look at me. Sheree met his gaze, finding unexpected comfort in his steady presence. "You survived," he continued. "You did exactly what you needed to do. Don't let them take that from you." Tears welled in her eyes, and she hated herself for it. She wasn't a crier, never had been, but today had broken something inside her. To her surprise, Wesley shifted closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. She tensed initially, then slowly relaxed against him, allowing herself a moment of weakness in his presence. "I've got you," he murmured, his breath warm against her hair. "Just breathe." Sheree closed her eyes, focusing on the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear. For the first time since the alley, she felt truly safe. When she woke hours later, she was alone on the sofa, a soft blanket draped over her. The suite was dark except for the faint glow of a laptop screen emanating from the bedroom. Curious, Sheree rose quietly and moved toward the light. Wesley sat at the desk, his back to her, speaking in low tones to someone on a video call. "No, the embassy is out. As far as I'm concerned, we're solo on this." A voice replied, too faint for Sheree to make out the words. "Because that's not how I operate, Martinez. You know that." Another pause as the unseen person responded. "Look, I just need a site map on where the Casalisi are and intel on how they operate, and I need it yesterday." Wesley rotated in his chair, and Sheree ducked back, her heart racing. Had he seen her? She held her breath, listening. "Thanks, man. I owe you one. Tell the others I'll check in tomorrow." There were a few clicks of keys, then silence. Sheree waited a full minute before creeping back to the sofa, feigning sleep as Wesley approached. "Rest well?" he asked, his voice neutral. "Surprisingly, yes," she replied, turning over to face him. "Who were you talking to?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Work." "At 2 in the morning?" "Time zones," he said simply. "Go back to sleep, Sheree. We can talk more tomorrow." She wanted to press him, but something in his tone warned her against it. Instead, she nodded and closed her eyes, listening as he moved away. The next few days ushered them into an uneasy routine. Wesley was constantly vigilant, his eyes scanning every room, every face, every potential threat. He spent hours on his laptop or phone, speaking in hushed tones with his mysterious contacts. He'd refuse to allow her to go to her room to retrieve her things, noting that an empty room without her having checked out would raise red flags and unneeded attention. With her access band in hand, he went to her room instead to collect the necessities she'd listed out on a piece of hotel stationery for him. Messing up the bed and strewing shoes and a few towels around to give the space the appearance of occupancy, Wesley made quick work of grabbing Sheree's cosmetics bag and loaded down his backpack with a small mountain of her clothing. He'd had one foot out the door when he remembered the items she mentioned having left in the dresser. Scooping them into his large hands, he shoved what he could in the utility pockets of his pants before heading back to his suite. "Wait, I'm missing," Sheree blurted, out then abruptly stopped speaking. He'd been back for more than an hour, and she was doing an inventory of the items he'd brought from her room. "Oh yeah, here," Wesley said as he reached into his pants pockets and held out her lacy underwear. The gasp was audible as Sheree offered a muted thanks and snatched the silky articles from him. Wesley's face was an expressionless mask, even as the tips of his ears burned a bright vermilion. Each day, room service was ordered, and Wesley remained perched on the balcony that gave him a superior vantage point of the expanse of the resort. He promised her that once he'd gotten a lay of the land, they could spend time exploring the grounds, but Sheree was restless. Wesley engaged with her as best he could, even teaching her basic situational awareness, how to identify potential threats, and a few self-defense moves that made her laugh despite their grim circumstances. "Like this?" she asked, attempting a wrist escape technique that left her flailing awkwardly. Wesley caught her hands, his touch sending an unexpected jolt through her body. "Not quite. You need to use their momentum against them, not fight it." He positioned himself behind her, guiding her arms through the proper movements. His breath warm against her ear, his body close but not touching, Sheree found it difficult to concentrate on the lesson. The scent of him, clean soap and something uniquely male, filled her senses, making her heart race for reasons entirely unrelated to danger. "There," he said, his voice low. "Feel that?" "I feel something," she replied, her face immediately burning when she realized how that sounded. Their eyes met, and the air between them crackled with an awareness that had been building since their first meeting. Wesley's gaze dropped to her lips, lingering there for a heartbeat too long before he stepped back, creating distance between them. "You're getting better," he said, his voice slightly rough, "but we should call it a day for now." Sheree nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment that surged through her. Okay. 3 days passed in a strange bubble of tension and intimacy. Wesley and Sheree fell into an uneasy routine, mornings spent reviewing security protocols and afternoons exploring the limited safety of the hotel grounds. Wesley seemed to enjoy sunbathing or reading in the balcony hammock. Sheree, meanwhile, was going stir-crazy. The suite, however luxurious, had begun to feel like a prison. "I can't take it anymore," she announced on the 4th morning, pacing the living area. "I'm going to lose my mind in here." Wesley looked up from his laptop, his expression unreadable. "It's for your safety." "I understand that, but I didn't come to Italy to stare at 4 walls. I have excursions booked, activities planned." "Cancel them." "I can't. Some were non-refundable. Besides, I refuse to let these criminals ruin my entire vacation." Wesley sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Sheree, this isn't a game. These people don't give up." "I know that," she said, her voice rising with frustration. "But I can't hide in here forever. At least let me go on the island tour tomorrow. It's a full-day, large group excursion. We'll blend in." "What all does it entail?" He scrubbed a hand over his face, already regretting having asked. "A boat tour along the coast, followed by lunch in Amalfi and a visit to the Emerald Grotto." He studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes intense. "Give me a couple of hours to coordinate with my team. If they agree, you follow my lead. No wandering off, no talking to strangers unless I'm present. You stick to me like glue." "I promise," she said, relief flooding through her. "And if I say we're leaving, we leave. No questions asked." "Deal." Wesley's shoulders slumped slightly. "You're going to be the death of me, woman." "Let's hope not," she replied with a weak smile. The next morning, Wesley was already up when Sheree emerged from the guest bedroom where she'd finally agreed to sleep. He'd laid out clothes for both of them, neutral tones, nothing that would draw attention. "Subtle," she noted, eyeing the beige linen pants and simple white blouse. "Tourists stick out enough without announcing ourselves with loud colors," he said, handing her the pair of sunglasses he'd found on her nightstand. By 9, they were boarding a tour bus with 30 other travelers. Wesley insisted they sit near the back, giving him a clear view of everyone on board. "Relax," she murmured as the bus pulled away from the resort. "Try to enjoy yourself." Sheree also tried. She really did. The scenery was breathtaking. Steep cliffs dotted with terraced vineyards and endless views of the sparkling Tyrrhenian Sea. But despite begging to be released from lockdown in his suite, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of danger lurking just beyond the picturesque landscapes. Wesley remained alert throughout the tour, his eyes constantly moving, assessing every person they passed. In time, he managed to appear relaxed, but Sheree knew he was highly focused. Their first stop was a traditional village, and Sheree had immediately fallen in love. She browsed the local shops, admiring handmade and intricate lacework. Wesley stayed close, but gave her space to breathe. "Try this," she said, pressing a small pastry into his hand. "The vendor said it's made from local honey and nuts." Wesley took a tiny bite, his eyes rounding at the burst of flavor. "That's amazing." "See? Not so bad being out, is it?" "Maybe not." he conceded with an imperceptible smile. The tour continued to a winery perched on the island's highest point. As they sampled wines cultivated from volcanic soil, Sheree found herself genuinely enjoying the experience. Wesley's presence was a reassuring constant at her side. "You know," she said as they admired the view from the winery's terrace, "for a scary-looking guy, you're not so bad." Wesley chuckled, a deep sound that vibrated through her. "And for a damsel in distress, you're handling yourself remarkably well." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world around them faded. The connection between them, forged in fear and danger, was undeniable, growing stronger with each passing hour. "Come on," he said, breaking the spell. "We're falling behind." The final stop of the day was a beachside osteria where they'd enjoy a traditional local supper and dancing. As the sun began to set, casting the sky in brilliant shades of ginger and blush, musicians took the stage, their mandolins filling the air with lively tunes. "Would the couple like to join us?" the instructor called out, gesturing directly at Wesley and Sheree. "Oh, no, that's okay," Wesley began, but Sheree was already rising. "We'd love to," she said, offering him her hand. Wesley hesitated, then took her hand in his and led her to the makeshift dance floor. The instructor positioned them among a handful of other volunteers, demonstrating the basic steps of the tarantella. "Just follow my lead," Wesley murmured gruffly, his hand finding the small of her back. The music swelled, and they began to move. At first, their steps were awkward, mismatched, but as the rhythm took hold, they found their groove, bodies sinking in an easy, natural flow. Sheree laughed as Wesley spun her out, then back into his arms. The tension of the past several days melted away, replaced by the joy of the moment, the freedom of movement, and the unexpected pleasure of dancing with this man who had so suddenly become her anchor. "See? Not so hard," she said, and he grunted in the affirmative. Sheree looked up at him then, really looked at him, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. It wasn't just attraction, though that was certainly there. It was something deeper, something that spoke of understanding, of shared experience, of a connection forged in the crucible of danger. The music eventually slowed, becoming more intimate, more sensual. Wesley's arm tightened around her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space between them. They moved as one, bodies swaying in perfect rhythm, their eyes locked in a silent conversation that needed no words. Sheree's heart hammered against her ribs, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from something far more dangerous, far more intoxicating. She could feel the heat of his body through their clothes, could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with the sea air. "Wesley," she breathed, not sure what she meant to say. His gaze dropped to her lips, and the air between them crackled with electricity. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, time to stop what was happening. She didn't want to stop. Their lips were inches apart when something shifted. Wesley's body went rigid, his eyes suddenly alert, scanning the crowd around them. "What is it?" Sheree asked, her voice barely audible. "Company," he murmured, his jaw tight. "Don't look. 3 o'clock, moving toward us." Sheree's blood ran cold. She forced herself to keep dancing, to maintain the facade of a carefree tourist, but every muscle in her body tensed. How many? 3, maybe 4. They're trying to blend in, but they're moving with purpose. The music swelled, providing cover as Wesley maneuvered them toward the edge of the dance floor. His movements were fluid, calculated, never betraying the urgency of their situation. "When I say so, we run," he said, his voice low and steady. "There's an alley between the osterias. Head for it. Don't look back." Sheree nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. "Now." They broke apart, Wesley grabbing her hand as they sprinted away from the dance floor. Confused looks from other tourists followed them, but there was no time for explanations. "There they are!" someone shouted behind them. They ran faster, weaving through tables and chairs, knocking over drinks in their haste. The alley appeared ahead, a narrow passage between two buildings. "In here," Wesley yelled, pulling her toward the darkness. They plunged into the alley, the sounds of the osteria fading behind them. The passage twisted and turned, growing narrower as they moved deeper into the maze of buildings. "Keep going," Wesley urged, his hand gripping hers tightly. They rounded a corner and stopped dead. The alley opened into a vacant courtyard, a dead end. "Stay behind me," Wesley instructed, after hurling an expletive. Not waiting for her response, he pushed Sheree into the tight space between him and the furthest wall from the opening. Footsteps echoed from the alley entrance, growing louder as they neared. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, subsequently blocking their only escape route. "Well, well, well," the leader said, stepping forward. "What have we here? The little bird who flew the coop." Sheree's heart pounded against her ribs as she pressed herself against Wesley's back. His muscles were bunched, coiled, and ready to strike. "You don't have to do this," Wesley said, his voice dangerously calm. "Just walk away." The men laughed, a harsh sound that grated on Sheree's nerves. Big talk for a tourist, but then again, you're not just a tourist, are you? Wesley didn't respond, his focus entirely on the threat before them. Sheree could feel the energy radiating from him, a predator preparing to strike. The leader motioned to his companions, and they moved as one unit, spreading out to flank them. The first man lunged, swinging a wild punch that Wesley easily dodged. He countered with a swift jab to the man's throat, sending him staggering backward, gasping for air. The second man came from the side, but Wesley was ready, pivoting to deliver a sharp kick to his knee. There was an audible crack as the man went down with a scream. The leader watched, his expression unchanged. "Impressive, but you're still outnumbered." Wesley fell into a defensive stance, positioning himself between Sheree and the remaining threat. "You know what they say about numbers. They don't mean much if you don't know how to use them." The leader smiled, a cold, predatory expression. "We'll see about that." He motioned to the third man who had recovered from Wesley's initial strike. They moved in tandem, coordinating their attack with practiced efficiency. Wesley met them head-on, his movements fluid and precise. He blocked, struck, and evaded with a grace that belied his muscular frame. The fight was brutal, but brief, ending with the man on the ground moaning in pain. The leader watched, his expression finally showing a hint of concern. He reached into his jacket, and Sheree's blood ran cold as he pulled out a gun. "Game over," he said, aiming directly at Wesley's chest. Time seemed to slow as Sheree's eyes darted around the alley, searching for something, anything that could help. Her gaze landed on a discarded stack of bricks near the wall, construction debris from an adjacent building. Without thinking, acting purely on instinct, Sheree grabbed 2 bricks. They were heavier than she expected, rough against her palms. "Goodbye, Mr. Bodyguard," the leader said, his finger tightening on the trigger. Sheree raised one of the bricks, her arms trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. She took a step back, then forward, gathering all her strength as she chucked it. The brick connected with the side of the man's head with a sickening crunch. He staggered sideways, his eyes wide with shock, then crumpled to the ground, the gun clattering beside him. Silence descended on the alley, broken only by their ragged breathing. Sheree stared at the motionless figure on the ground, the other brick still clutched in her hand. "Did I kill him?" she asked, her voice shaking. Wesley turned to face her, his expression unreadable. He gently took the brick from her hand, setting it aside. "No," he said firmly, gripping her shoulders. "Is he—" Wesley glanced at the man lying motionless on the ground, blood trickling from his temple where the brick had struck him. He wasn't sure, And frankly, he didn't care. What mattered was that Sheree was safe. He knelt beside the man, checking for a pulse. Alive, unconscious but alive. You got lucky with the angle. Sheree stared at her hands, now trembling uncontrollably. I wouldn't. Hey, Wesley said, rising and cupping her face in his hands. Look at me. You did what you had to do. You saved us both. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. We need to get out of here. Agreed. He glanced around the alley. He took her hand again, leading her past the motionless bodies and out of the alley into the fading light of evening. The square was still bustling with tourists, oblivious to the violence that had unfolded just steps away. Act normal, Wesley instructed, his arm wrapping around her waist as he guided her toward the edge of the crowd. We're just a couple of tourists, enjoying our evening. As they merged back into the throng, Sheree leaned into Wesley's embrace, drawing strength from his presence. They had survived, barely, but she knew this wasn't over. The men who had attacked them were just foot soldiers, disposable pawns in a much larger game. And the players behind the scenes were still out there, waiting for their next move. The drive back to the hotel was tense, Wesley's knuckles white on the headrest in front of him as he constantly looked out the windows and observed the other passengers. Sheree sat beside him, her body still trembling from the aftermath of the attack. You were incredible, Wesley said suddenly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. What you did back there, that took guts. I just reacted, Sheree replied softly, her voice small. I couldn't let him hurt you. Wesley glanced over at her, his blue eyes softening. Still, most people would have frozen. You didn't. Our defensive classes came in handy, she said, managing a weak smile. He reached out, his fingers lacing with hers. We're not out of this yet, but we will be, I promise. When they arrived back at the hotel, Wesley bypassed the main entrance, steering them toward a service entrance adjacent to the stairwell that led directly to their suite. Once inside, he immediately secured the room, his movements efficient and precise. We need to move up the timeline, he said, pulling out his satellite phone. The attack in Amalfi changes everything. As he paced across the suite and into his room, speaking in low, urgent tones with his team, Sheree followed behind him and flopped on the armchair, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion that had been threatening to overwhelm her. She closed her eyes just for a moment. When she opened them again, she was lying on the bed in Wesley's bedroom, a light blanket draped over her. The room was dark except for a single lamp on the nightstand, and Wesley was sitting in the armchair she'd vacated beside the bed, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. How long was I out? She asked, her voice thick with sleep. A few hours, he replied, his voice low. You needed the rest. What did your team say? Sheree asked, pushing herself into a sitting position. Wesley's expression hardened. The attack in Amalfi wasn't random. They've been tracking us since we left the hotel. The Camorra doesn't like loose ends, and you're the biggest one they've had in a while. So what's the plan? Sheree asked, her heart sinking. The plan, Wesley said, his voice grim, is extraction. In 2 days' time, my team is arranging military transport out of Italy, then a private jet to Ramstein Air Base in Germany. From there, commercial to the States. Sheree's mind reeled. 2 days. That's soon. Too soon, according to my team, Wesley admitted, running a hand through his short blonde hair. But the attack in Amalfi accelerated the timeline. The Casalesi clan knows we're here, and they're not going to stop coming. He moved to sit on the edge of the bed, his proximity sending an unexpected jolt through her body. There's something else you should know. The man you hit with the brick, he didn't make it. Sheree's breath caught. I killed him? You saved my life, Wesley corrected gently, his hand covering hers where it rested on the blanket. It was self-defense. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden. I'm a photojournalist, Wesley. I've dedicated my life to telling the story, uncovering the truth. I've never hurt anyone in my life. Hey, he said, his voice softening as he shifted closer. Look at me. His blue eyes were intense, but not judgmental. You did what you had to do to survive. There's no shame in that. Sheree shook her head, the weight of what she'd done settling heavily on her shoulders. It doesn't feel that way. Then let me carry the weight for a while, Wesley offered, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. The sincerity in his voice disarmed her completely, and before she could stop herself, she was leaning into his touch, seeking comfort in the warmth of his hand. Their eyes met, and the air between them shifted, charged with an awareness that went beyond their current predicament.
We should get some rest, Wesley said, his voice huskier than before. We'll need to head out tomorrow. Sheree nodded reluctantly, but as he started to rise, she tightened her grip on his hand. Stay, she whispered, the word escaping before she could stop it. Just until I fall asleep. Wesley searched her face, his expression unreadable, but then he nodded, settling back into the chair. Okay, he said softly. I'm not going anywhere. Sleep was elusive for both of them. Sheree drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind replaying the events of the past few days. The murder in the alley, the chase through the market, the attack in Amalfi, and the man whose life she had ended. Each time she surfaced, Wesley was there, a silent sentinel in the darkness, his presence both comforting and unsettling. Around 3 a.m., she gave up on sleep entirely, padding quietly to the living area where Wesley stood by the window, his silhouette framed by the moonlight on the sea. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly. He turned, his expression indecipherable in the dim light. "Too much on my mind." "Me too," Sheree admitted, moving to stand beside him. They stood in comfortable silence for a long moment, watching the waves crash against the shore below. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there in the market that day," she said suddenly. Wesley's jaw tightened. "You'd have figured something out. You're tougher than you think." "I'm not," she countered, shaking her head. "I was terrified, still am." Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. You've got plenty of it. Their eyes met in the darkness, and the air between them crackled with an awareness that had been building since their first meeting. Wesley's gaze fell to her heart-shaped mouth, lingered there for a tick too long before rising to meet hers again. "Sheree," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "What happened with your job?" he asked, deliberately changing the subject before he ended up doing something that could not be undone. Startled by the pivot, Sheree blinked before answering. "My editor scrapped my project about the corruption of war generally, and charities specifically in Sudan, because he felt that my depictions would be too dangerous to divulge." "Dangerous for whom?" Wesley asked. "Governments? Corporations? Who knows? I was following the money before the story was unceremoniously halted," she pointed out wryly. "I'm sorry that you were expected to compromise your integrity. Despite the outcome, you were brave to have challenged them." He looked at her knowingly after a long beat. "Or stupid," she laughed, but the sound was hollow, brittle. "My editor said I was recklessly idealistic and that my photos were too confrontational for their readership." Wesley's gaze deepened with an understanding that went beyond mere words. "Your work, your integrity is what matters. Never let anyone make you question that." The sincerity in his voice disarmed her completely, and before she could stop herself, she was leaning closer, drawn by an invisible force that seemed to pulse between them. Their faces were inches apart, the air thick with unspoken desires and dangerous possibilities. But before either could act, his satellite phone buzzed on the railing, shattering the moment like glass. Wesley's jaw tightened as he glanced at the screen. "Drake?" he answered, his voice all business again. Sheree watched as his expression hardened, his shoulders tensing. Whatever news he was receiving wasn't good. "We're compromised," he said after a moment, his eyes meeting hers.
The Casalesi have paid off someone at the resort. They know which suite we're in. They're coming." "When?" Sheree asked, her blood running cold. "Now." Wesley moved with purpose, grabbing a backpack from the closet and stuffing essentials inside. "Get dressed. Dark clothes, nondescript. We have to move." Sheree scrambled to comply, her clumsy fingers fumbling with buttons as adrenaline surged through her system. When she emerged from the bathroom, her own bag hastily packed and her camera around her neck, Wesley was waiting, his expression grim. "What about our things?" She looked around the room at the rest of their luggage. "The team will send in a cleanup crew once we're gone. In the meantime, if it can't fit in that pack, it stays," Wesley explained. Sheree nodded her understanding. "There's a service tunnel in the basement," he said, handing her a small flashlight. "It leads to the maintenance shed, then to the road. We'll head north, away from the coast." "North? Where are we going?"
"To my safe house," he replied, shouldering his backpack. "About 3 hours from here, if we're lucky." The next few minutes were a blur of controls chaos. Wesley moved with military precision, checking exits, disabling security cameras, and leaving behind a series of false trails to confuse their pursuers. "Ready?" he asked, extending a hand. Sheree nodded, her heart pounding against her ribs as she laced her fingers in his. His grip was firm, reassuring, a lifeline in the storm that had become her existence. They slipped out of the suite, moving silently down the corridor to the service elevator. With Martinez's help, Wesley had overridden the security system earlier, giving them access to areas restricted to guests. As they descended into the bowels of the resort, Sheree couldn't shake the feeling that they were plunging into hell itself. The basement was a maze of pipes, wires, and machinery. Wesley navigated it with ease, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness as he led her toward a narrow passage marked "Authorized Access Only." "Stay close," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. Sheree nodded, her throat too tight to speak. They crawled through the tunnel, the damp earth pressing in on them from all sides. Time seemed to stretch and warp in the darkness, each minute feeling like an eternity, until finally they emerged into the cool night air. The maintenance shed was exactly as Wesley had described it, a small, weathered building tucked away from the main resort. Inside, he retrieved a duffel bag from a hidden compartment, along with a set of car keys. "Come on," he said, leading her to a dusty pickup truck parked behind the shed. "This should get us far enough away to ditch and find something less conspicuous." As they drove away from the resort, Sheree risked a glance back and saw headlights cutting through the darkness, search parties already looking for them. "They're fast," she said, her voice barely audible. "They're desperate," Wesley corrected, his eyes fixed on the winding mountain road ahead. And desperate people make mistakes. The journey north was harrowing. Wesley drove with expert precision, taking back roads and mountain passes that seemed to defy gravity. Sheree clung to her seat, her knuckles white with tension as they navigated hairpin turns, overlooking steep drops into the darkness below. "Where is your safe house located?" Sheree asked, her voice trembling. "In a place where they won't think to look," Wesley replied, his eyes scanning the road ahead. "It's nestled in a small village in the Apennine Mountains, remote, isolated, and completely off the grid." Hours passed in tense silence. The only sounds were the engine's steady hum and their ragged breathing. Sheree found herself watching Wesley in the dim light of the dashboard and encroaching dawn, his profile sharp and focused, his hands steady on the wheel despite the treacherous conditions. "You've done this before," she said, more statement than question. "More times than I care to remember," he admitted, his gaze flicking toward her briefly. "But this time feels different." "Different how?" He hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "This time, I'm not just protecting a client, I'm protecting someone who matters." The admission hung between them, raw and vulnerable, and Sheree felt her heart ache with an emotion she couldn't name. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his arm, and felt him tense beneath her touch.
"Wesley, not now," he interrupted gently, his eyes back on the road. "We need to focus. There'll be time for everything later." Sheree nodded, withdrawing her hand, but not the warmth that spread through her body at his words. She settled back into her seat, watching as the landscape changed from coastal plains to rugged mountains, the air growing cooler, crisper as they climbed higher into the Apennines. Dawn was breaking when Wesley finally turned off the main road onto a narrow dirt track that wound its way up a mountainside. The truck groaned in protest as they climbed higher, the path becoming increasingly treacherous. "Almost there," he said, his voice low but assuring. The safe house appeared suddenly, as if materializing from the mist that clung to the mountainside. It was a stone cottage, ancient and weathered, with a slate roof and a small garden that had gone wild with neglect. Wesley parked the truck behind a stone wall, effectively hiding it from view. "Home sweet home," he said, cutting the engine. "For now, anyway." Sheree followed him inside, her legs stiff from the long journey. The cottage was simple but functional, a main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen,
and a bedroom with a large bed pushed against the far wall. "It's not much," Wesley said, dropping the duffel bag on the floor, "but it's safe. No one knows about this place except my team." "It's perfect," Sheree replied, and to her surprise, she meant it. The cottage felt like a sanctuary, a place where they could finally breathe, even if just for a little while. Wesley moved through the space with practiced efficiency, checking windows, securing doors, and setting up a series of communication devices that connected him to his team. Sheree watched, mesmerized by his competence, his calm demeanor in the face of chaos. "We should be safe here for a day or two," he said, finally turning to face her. "Long enough to regroup, rest, and plan our next move." "What is our next move?" Sheree asked, her voice tired and low. Wesley's expression softened, his blue eyes darkening with an emotion that made her heart race. "First, we rest. Then, we figure out how to get you out of the country without anyone knowing." Sheree stared at him. "You really do this for a living, don't you?" "It pays the bills," he replied with a shrug, "and occasionally lets me save beautiful women from certain death." Sheree felt a blush creeping up her neck. The small space was suddenly suffocating, overflowing with unspoken desires and precarious implications. Wesley's eyes were again on autopilot as they dropped to her lips before he forced himself to meet her questioning gaze. "Let's try to get a bit of sleep before the sun comes up fully," Wesley suggested, still distracted by the woman before him. "Okay." The early afternoon light filtered through the dusty cottage windows, casting long shadows across the stone floor. Sheree stirred from where she'd fallen asleep on a worn sofa, her body protesting after the harrowing journey earlier that morning. Wesley was already awake, standing in the kitchen with his back to her, speaking in low tones into his satellite phone. She watched him for a moment, noting the way the sunlight caught the golden strands in his short blonde hair and the tension in his broad shoulders that never seemed to fully relax even in sleep. There was something about him, something beyond his imposing physical presence, that both intimidated and drew her in. "No, we're secure for now," he said into the phone. "Yes, the cottage. Understood. Keep monitoring channels. Good. I'll check in at 1900 hours." When he turned and saw she was awake, he ended the call abruptly. "Sleep well?" "Relatively speaking," Sheree replied, stretching her stiff muscles. "You?" "Still settling in. I'll make sure to get a good night's sleep tonight," he replied, and she looked at him disbelievingly. Avoiding her pitying expression, Wesley moved to the kitchen area, opening cupboards and taking inventory. "The cottage is stocked with basic supplies. We should be fine for a few days." "That's good." They spent the morning familiarizing themselves with the cottage and its surroundings. Wesley showed her the hidden escape routes, the emergency supplies, the surveillance equipment he'd set up around the perimeter. Sheree found herself impressed by his thoroughness, his attention to detail that went beyond mere caution.
It was survival instinct honed by years of experience. After a late but simple brunch of bread, cheese, and fruit, Wesley led her outside to a clearing behind the cottage. The house was nestled in a small valley, surrounded by dense forest that climbed the mountainside. A narrow stream babbled nearby, its waters crystal clear and icy cold. The nearest village is about 5 kilometers that way, Wesley pointed east. A population of a couple hundred people, most of them elderly. They keep to themselves, which is exactly what we need. Is there anyone else out here? Sheree asked, her eyes scanning the tree line. Just us, Wesley confirmed. Let's hope it stays that way. Their eyes met, and Sheree felt that familiar flutter in her stomach, the one that seemed to appear whenever Wesley looked at her with that intensity that went beyond mere protection. Come on, he said, breaking the moment. Time for your lesson. They returned to the cottage, clearing space in the main room by pushing the heavy wooden table against the wall. Wesley rolled up the worn rug, revealing the cold stone floor beneath. Today, we're working on ground defense, he said, his tone shifting to instructor mode. If they get you on the ground, you're at a disadvantage, but not helpless. Sheree nodded, her expression serious. I'm ready. The first few moves were simple enough. How to break a hold, how to create distance, how to use your legs as weapons. But when Wesley moved to a more complex escape technique, Sheree struggled. Again, he said, his patience seemingly endless. You need to use their momentum against them. When I pin you like this, he demonstrated, pressing her shoulders to the floor, you don't fight up, you roll to the side, using your hips to bridge. I'm trying, Sheree grunted, attempting the move but failing to create enough space to escape his grip. No, you're fighting it, he corrected, adjusting his position. Relax into it, then explode when the moment's right. They tried again, with the same result. Wesley easily maintained control, his weight and strength overwhelming her efforts. Crap, Sheree muttered, frustration mounting. Why can't I get this? Because you're thinking too much, Wesley said, helping her up. It needs to be instinct. Easy for you to say, she snapped, her irritation showing. You are not the one being pinned by a 200-pound killing machine. Wesley's eyebrow arched at her tone, but he said nothing. He simply reset their position. Again. This time, Sheree fought harder, her movements aggressive and uncontrolled. Wesley countered easily, flipping her onto her back with a movement so swift it left her breathless. Stop fighting me and start using my energy against me, he instructed, his voice firm but not hostile. I am, she shouted, her frustration boiling over. I'm doing exactly what you said. No, you're not, he countered, his patience finally wearing thin. You're letting your anger control you. That's how people get hurt. And what would you know about it? She retorted, shoving against his chest with surprising force. You're the one who does this for fun. Wesley's expression hardened, his eyes darkening. This isn't fun, Sheree. This is survival. And if you can't get that through your head, you're not going to survive. The words hit their mark, and Sheree's anger deflated as quickly as it had risen. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden. I'm sorry, she whispered, turning away from him. I can't. Hey, Wesley said, his voice softening as he reached for her. Look at me. Sheree shook her head, ashamed of her outburst. Wesley gently turned her to face him, his hands framing her face. It's okay, he said, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. You've been through hell. It's normal to feel overwhelmed. I just want to go home, she admitted, her voice cracking. I know, he replied softly, and we will, I promise. Their eyes met in the fading sunlight of the cottage, and the air between them shifted, full of an awareness that went beyond their current predicament. Wesley closed his eyes and took a deep, cleansing breath before speaking. You should get cleaned up. I'll make us something to eat, he said, deliberately disrupting the heady silence between them. Okay, Sheree whispered, flustered but agreeing as she hurried away. The bathroom was small but functional, with a clawfoot tub that looked older than the cottage itself. Sheree turned on the taps, the pipes groaning in protest, before sputtering to life. As the tub filled with steaming water, she caught her reflection in the mirror above the sink, pale, exhausted, with eyes that seemed too large for her face. She stripped off her clothes, folding them neatly on the closed toilet lid, before sinking into the hot water. The heat seeped into her bones, chasing away the chill that had settled deep within her since the alley in Positano. For the second time in as many days, she allowed herself to feel, truly feel, the terror, the grief, the bone-deep weariness of being hunted. Tears streamed down her face, silent and unstoppable. She cried for the man whose life had been so brutally ended, for the life she had taken to save Wesley's, for the woman she had been just days ago, confident, independent, blissfully unaware of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of paradise. By the time she emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a threadbare towel, the cottage smelled of garlic and herbs. Wesley stood at the small stove, stirring something in a cast-iron pan. He had changed into a simple black t-shirt and jeans, his muscular frame outlined by the soft lampshade. "Feel better?" he asked, not turning around. "Much," she replied, her voice still thick with emotion. He set the spoon down and turned to face her, his eyes darkening as they took in her towel-clad form. "There are clothes in the chest. Should be something that fits." Sheree nodded, suddenly acutely aware of her state of undress. She found the chest in the corner of the bedroom, lifting the heavy lid to reveal an assortment of men's clothing in various sizes. She selected an oversized plain gray t-shirt that was slightly too big but clean and comfortable. When she returned to the main room, Wesley had set 2 places at the small wooden table. He served them pasta with a simple tomato sauce, accompanied by crusty bread and a bottle of red wine. "Bon appetit," he said, sitting opposite her. "Buon appetit, we're in Italy, remember?" she noted playfully as they clinked glasses. They ate in comfortable silence. The only sounds made were the scraping of forks against plates and the crackle of the fire Wesley had started in the stone fireplace. After dinner, they cleaned up together, their movements synchronized in the small space. Wesley's hand brushed against hers as they both reached for the same dish, and electricity shot through her body, intense and unexpected. He looked down at her, and she returned his gaze without shame. At that moment, it was clear that his awareness of her was becoming harder to ignore. "We should get to bed," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Long day tomorrow." Sheree nodded reluctantly, but as he started to turn away, she reached out, her fingers curling around his wrist. "Wesley." He stilled, his muscles tensing beneath her touch. "Yeah? I really am sorry to have put you in this position," she said, her voice apologetic and tight. He turned back to face her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I'm just doing my job." "Is that all this is?" she asked, her heart pounding against her ribs at her own bold inquiry. Wesley's jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought he might pull away. Instead, he covered her hand with his thumb stroking the back of her wrist. "No," he admitted, his voice low. "It's not." The admission hung between them, raw and vulnerable, and Sheree felt her heart twinge with an emotion she couldn't name. She leaned closer, drawn by an invisible force that seemed to pulse between them. "I don't know what's happening, but," she began, her voice strained yet measured. Before she could finish, he shook his head, gently disentangling his hand from hers. "We can't, Sheree. Not now, not while you're still in danger." "Right, of course," she whispered, though every fiber of her being screamed otherwise. "Get some sleep," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We'll sort through next steps tomorrow." Sheree nodded, retreating to the bedroom, while Wesley banked the fire and checked the security systems one last time. The bed was larger than she expected, with a thick feather comforter and pillows that smelled faintly of lavender. She climbed in, pulling the covers up to her chin, but sleep was elusive. Hours later, Wesley slipped into the room, moving silently in the darkness. He hesitated next to the bed, then slid in beside her, careful not to touch. The mattress dipped with his weight, and Sheree became acutely aware of his presence, his warmth, his scent, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Tell me about your team," she said into the darkness, breaking the silence that filled every available space between them. Wesley turned, surprised by the question. "What about them? Are they all like you, ex-military turned whatever it is that's on your Rent-A-Warrior website?" He chuckled despite himself. "Something like that. Martinez was Army Rangers, same as me. Jackson was Marine Corps Force Recon. Chen did time in Naval Intelligence. O'Malley was Air Force Pararescue. The recruitment ad just writes itself," Sheree observed. "The best of the best," Wesley agreed on another chuckle. "We all crossed paths at some point and decided we could do more good on our own terms than within the armed forces. Does the reason for your solo vacation have more to do with just your job taking a toll?" She pivoted abruptly. "Doesn't take a genius to figure that out," he replied, staring up at the ceiling. "Meaning, my job isn't exactly conducive to healthy relationships." "Because of the danger?" "Because of the secrecy," he corrected, adjusting his position until he was more comfortably situated. "How do you build something real with someone when you can't tell them what you do, where you're going, when you'll be back, or if you'll be back at all?" Sheree considered his words. "I hadn't thought of it that way." "Most people don't," he said, now facing her. "They see the excitement, the adventure. They don't see the loneliness." "And you're lonely?" she asked gently. Wesley quieted. "Wouldn't you be?" Sheree turned over in the dark and placed a hand on his cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Without his consent, Wesley's lips whispered her name, and Sheree pressed her body nearer to him. Restraint abandoned in that tender moment. He closed the space between them and kissed her passionately, his lips claiming hers with a hunger that matched her own. The kiss deepened, their tongues tangling and their hands exploring. Wesley's touches and caresses were frantic as he reached beneath Sheree's sleep shirt, his calloused fingers tracing the curve of her waist, the dip of her spine. The exploration of his hands eventually led him to the supple, beaded flesh of her breasts. When he cupped and then squeezed her, she responded by pressing herself into his large hands. The wanton moan she exhaled was instant, and with it, the spell was broken. Bolting upright, Wesley stopped himself, pulling back with a ragged breath. "We can't," he said, his voice thick with desire. "Not like this." "Why not?" Sheree asked, her body still humming with need. "Because you're vulnerable," he explained, his gaze intense. "Because you're relying on me to keep you safe. This would complicate everything. It wouldn't be real, not under these circumstances." Sheree wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. They were living in a bubble, a heightened reality where emotions were magnified and consequences were forgotten. "I know," she whispered, though every fiber of her being wanted to deny that assertion. With that important barrier reestablished, they both eventually turned with their backs to one another and fell asleep, the space between them just as treacherous as the Cassalacy in pursuit. The next morning dawned gray and misty, the mountains shrouded in clouds. Wesley was already up when Sheree emerged from the bedroom, his expression grim as he studied a map spread across the kitchen table. "Bad news?" she asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Change of plans," he replied, not looking up. "My team intercepted some communications. The Cassalacy have checkpoints set up on all major routes out of the region. We can't risk the roads." "So what's the alternative?" "We go off-road," he said, finally meeting her gaze. "Down the mountains. It'll be slower, more dangerous, but it's our best shot at avoiding their net." Sheree's heart sank, but she nodded. "Whatever it takes." They spent the next hour preparing for the journey, packing supplies, checking equipment, planning their route. Wesley moved with military precision, his focus absolute, while Sheree did her best to keep up, her mind racing with the implications of their new plan. "Ready?" he asked, shouldering his heavy backpack. "As I'll ever be," she replied, forcing a smile. The journey was grueling.
They hiked through rugged terrain, climbed down steep ledges, and crossed treacherous ravines. Wesley led the way, his knowledge of the landscape evident in every step, while Sheree followed, her body aching with exhaustion, but her spirit unbroken. As they traversed the wilderness, they became even more drawn to one another. There were stolen glances as they stopped to rest, accidental touches that lingered a moment too long, conversations that veered dangerously close to revealing and personal. In addition to the scenic imagery she captured, when Wesley wasn't looking, she'd snapped several candid shots of him in profile. Try as they might to ignore it, the tension between them was palpable, a living thing that seemed to pulse with every beat of their hearts. By nightfall, they reached a small village nestled in a valley, its stone houses clustered around a central square. They descended the ridge carefully, avoiding the main road and sticking to the shadows. The village was quiet, most residents indoors at this hour. They moved through the narrow streets with practiced stealth, Wesley leading the way. "There," he whispered, pointing to a small osteria near the pier. "We'll wait there, blend in with the locals." The osteria was dimly lit, filled with the smell of grilled fish and Negroni. A few patrons sat at tables, speaking in low tones. Wesley chose a table in the corner, giving them a clear view of the entrance and the pier beyond. "Order whatever looks local," he advised as a waiter approached, "and keep your voice down." Sheree nodded, studying the menu in Italian. When it became clear that she couldn't decipher what she was reading, Wesley ordered for them both: grilled prawns, antipasta salad, fresh bread, and 2 glasses of local wine. "Try to relax," he said as the waiter departed. "We're almost there." Sheree took a sip of wine, the rich flavor calming her frayed nerves. "Do you really think this will work?" "It has to," Wesley replied, his eyes scanning the room. "We're out of options." They ate in relative silence, the conversation around them providing cover for their own tense exchange. As the clock approached 11, Wesley paid the bill, leaving a generous tip. "Time to go," he said, rising from the table. "Stay close to me, keep your head down, and don't make eye contact with anyone." They slipped out of the quaint restaurant and into the darkness of the night, the cool sea air a welcome relief from the stuffy interior. Wesley moved with purpose, his hand resting possessively on the small of Sheree's back as he guided her toward the pier. "Almost there," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. The pier was deserted, save for a few fishing boats bobbing gently in the water. At the far end, a sleek black speedboat waited, its engines idling softly. A figure stood near the boat, scanning the area with military precision. "That's Jackson," Wesley said, nodding toward the figure. "My teammate." As they approached, Jackson's eyes narrowed, then relaxed as he recognized Wesley. "Drake, you're late." "Had to do the last leg on foot with a civilian in tow," Wesley glared, his voice hushed. "This is Sheree Michaels. Sheree, this is Jackson." Marcus Jackson nodded curtly, his gaze assessing her with professional detachment. "Ma'am, we need to move. Now." "Why are you so full of piss and vinegar?" Wesley murmured low, eyeing his friend while helping Sheree into the boat. "We should have been gone," Jackson said, his expression grim. "The Casalisi have been tracking us. They know we're here." Before Wesley could fully process the information, 2 vehicles screeched to a halt at the entrance to the pier, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Men poured out, 6, maybe 7, armed with weapons that glinted in the moonlight. "Go," Wesley yelled, shoving Sheree toward the cabin of the boat as Jackson gunned the engines. "My camera!" she shrieked, as the device fell from around her neck and plummeted into the water between the dock and the boat. The boat lurched forward, rocketing away from the pier as gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets ricocheted off the water, some striking the boat with sickening thuds. "Get down," Wesley ordered, shielding Sheree with his body as he returned fire with a weapon that seemed to materialize from nowhere. The boat sped through the darkness, Wesley and Jackson exchanging precise, controlled bursts of fire with their pursuers. Sheree huddled in the cabin, her heart hammering against her ribs, as she watched Wesley in action. Calm, focused, utterly lethal. "Steer us in a 45-degree angle," Wesley shouted to Jackson, then turned to Sheree. "Stay here. Don't move." Before she could protest, he was gone, moving with fluid grace along the side of the boat, his weapon raised. He fired in short, controlled bursts, each shot finding its mark with deadly accuracy. One of the pursuing boats exploded in a shower of wood and flames, the force of the blast sending the other boat swerving wildly. Wesley seized the opportunity, firing a final shot that struck the second boat's engine, sending it dead in the water. "Nice shooting," Jackson called out, grinning as he guided their boat into a hidden cove. "Just doing my job," Wesley repeated the common refrain, his expression unreadable as he rejoined Sheree in the cabin. The cove Jackson brought them to was deserted, its entrance hidden by overhanging cliffs and dense vegetation. He cut the engines and the boat drifted silently toward a small dock where two figures waited. "O'Malley and Chen," Wesley said, nodding toward the figures, "more teammates." As they disembarked, Sheree found herself surrounded by Wesley's team, 3 men, each radiating the same quiet competence and dangerous energy as Wesley himself. "Ma'am," Sean O'Malley said, his Irish lilt thick as he nodded respectfully. "Pleasure to meet you, under the circumstances." "The circumstances being that we're all about to die," Chen Lei added dryly, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "Always the optimist, Chen," Jackson pointed out with a grin. "Status report," Wesley said, his voice all business. "Hope you folks had your Wheaties. The extraction point is another 2 kilometers from here," O'Malley replied, his expression guarded. "We've had to deviate from the original route to avoid being intercepted by the Cassalacy. They're sweeping the area methodically. This is the only route they haven't covered yet." "Then we'd better get moving," Wesley said, his voice cutting through the tension. He turned to Sheree, his expression softening slightly. "Stay close to me. No matter what happens, stay close." Sheree nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The reality of their situation crashed down on her. She was in the middle of a war zone, surrounded by men who killed for a living, hunted by an organization that wouldn't rest until she was dead. The journey through the dense undergrowth was grueling. Wesley's team moved with practiced efficiency, their steps silent, their weapons at the ready. Sheree struggled to keep pace, her lungs burning, her legs aching with every step. "We're nearly there," Wesley murmured, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "Just a little further." They emerged into a small clearing where a helicopter waited, its rotors spinning slowly. Jackson and Chen provided cover as Wesley guided Sheree toward the aircraft. "Go," Wesley shouted, pushing her toward the open door. "Get her out of here." Sheree scrambled into the helicopter, turning just in time to see Wesley raise his weapon as figures emerged from the surrounding forest. The night erupted in gunfire, the sound deafening as bullets tore through the air. "Wesley!" she screamed, her heart stopping as she saw him stumble, his body jerking backward as a bullet found its mark. He went down hard, but before she could react, Jackson was there, dragging him to his feet and half carrying, half dragging him toward the helicopter. O'Malley and Chen laid down covering fire, their weapons spitting death into the darkness. "Get us out of here, Martinez," Jackson yelled as he shoved Wesley into the aircraft, then climbed in behind him with Chen and O'Malley bringing up the rear. The helicopter lifted off, rising rapidly into the night sky as the gunfire faded below. Sheree rushed to Wesley's side, her hands trembling as she examined where he'd been shot. "Kevlar," he gritted out, although his face was etched with pain. "Nothing serious." "Liar," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she reached for the mast to unstrap and remove it from his chest. Considering her angst but needing to work quickly, O'Malley gently ushered Sheree aside so that he and the team could attend to Wesley. The flight from the extraction point was tense. Wesley's team worked with practiced efficiency to stabilize him, while Sheree hovered helplessly nearby. The vest had been a literal lifesaver, stopping the bullet from penetrating his body. Still, the high-energy impact had created enough blunt force trauma to break 2 ribs. Wesley was taking the injury in stride,
but it was clear by his labored breathing and wincing whenever moved that he was in tremendous pain. By the time they landed at a private airfield outside Zurich, he was pale but stable. "Hey, you ready?" Jackson asked softly, once Wesley was shuffled off the chopper and Sheree still sat in her seat looking shell-shocked. "Huh?" She looked up, tired and dazed. "Private jet to Rhymstein," he reminded her. "From there, commercial to the States. You'll be home by tomorrow night." Sheree nodded, her mind reeling with the rapid turn of events. Just hours ago, she'd been hiking through the Italian wilderness, and now she was on her way home, while Wesley— "What about him?" she asked, her voice breaking. "He needs a hospital." Looking out the window, they could see Martinez sprinting to the cockpit and Chen and O'Malley on either side of Wesley, bracing him as they moved with purpose across the tarmac. "We've got our own medical facilities in Rhineland-Palatinate. He'll be fine. Better than fine, actually." The jet in the distance was sleek and luxurious, but Sheree barely noticed. On Jackson's insistence, she climbed from the helicopter and moved toward the aircraft. Once aboard, she slid into the vacant seat next to Wesley that had been deliberately left for her. He was already seated in a reclined position, a sheen of sweat coating his forehead. When she saw a grimace etch across his face, she immediately reached for his hand. "You're safe now," he murmured, his eyes fluttering open. "That's all that matters." "Because of you," she whispered, leaning closer. "Because of your team." Wesley's gaze softened, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "We do what we do so people like you can sleep at night." The flight passed in a blur of catnaps and hushed conversations. By the time they landed at Rhymstein Air Base, Wesley was more alert, his color returning as the medication took effect. "This is where we say goodbye," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Martinez will escort you to your commercial flight. You'll be home before you know it."
Sheree's heart sank. "What about you? What about this?" Wesley's jaw tightened, and he glanced away, toward the medical team standing just outside the hangar waiting to transport him. "There is no this, no us, Sheree. There could never be." "Why?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Because of your job? Because it's too dangerous?" "Because it's impossible," he said, his eyes meeting hers again. "Look at what happened. Look at what you went through. It's normal for me. It's my life, Sheree, every day. I couldn't ask you to live like that." "You're not asking," she countered, her voice breaking. "I'm choosing." "No," he said, his tone firm but not harsh. "You're reacting. You're caught up in the adrenaline, the danger, the intensity of what we've been through. It's not real, not in the long term." "How dare you?" she whispered, her eyes flashing with anger. "How dare you tell me what I feel?" "I'm telling you what I know," he replied, his voice softening. "I've seen this before. Good people caught up in bad situations, developing feelings that are real in the moment, but can't survive in the light of day." "So that's all this is to you? A moment?" Wesley hesitated, his expression unreadable. "You need to go home, Sheree. Get back to your life. Forget about me, about what happened here." "Forget?" she laughed, but the sound was hollow, brittle. "How am I supposed to forget the man who saved my life? The man I—" "Don't," he interrupted, his voice sharp. "Don't say it." "You're afraid," she challenged, stepping closer. "You're afraid to admit that there's something between us." "I'm afraid of what happens to you if there is," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "My world is dark, Sheree. It's violent and dangerous, and it consumes everything it touches. I won't let it consume you." "Then come with me," she pleaded, her hand reaching for his. "Leave that world behind." "You know I can't," he replied, his gaze dropping to where her hand touched his arm. "There are still people who need help, still monsters like the Casalisi that need to be stopped." "And what about me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Don't I need help? Don't I matter?" Wesley's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he'd give in. Instead, he gently disentangled her hand from his arm. "You matter more than you know. That's why I have to let you go." Sheree stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. "You're a coward," she whispered, the words tasting like betrayal. "You're hiding behind your job because you're afraid to feel something real." Wesley flinched as if she'd struck him, his expression hardening. "Maybe I am," he said, his voice cold, "but at least I'm clear-eyed and honest about the real-world implications." Sheree shook her head disappointedly, her heart breaking into a million pieces. She turned, simply, and walked away, each step feeling heavier than the last. "Gabe Martinez," the handsome man introduced himself with a faint smile as she approached. Nodding slightly to keep from bursting into tears, Sheree allowed him to guide her toward his vehicle. During the brief drive, neither knew what to say. Instead of speaking, they let the silence hang between them, responsible for every rationalization. "He's doing what he thinks is right, you know," Martinez said when they finally reached the commercial terminal, his tone surprisingly gentle. "Is he?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Or is he just running away?" Martinez hesitated, then sighed. "Drake doesn't run away from anything. He runs toward danger, always has. But when it comes to matters of the heart, well, let's just say he's on guard." Sheree wanted to press him, but the boarding call for her flight echoed through the terminal, signaling the end of their conversation. She nodded reluctantly, allowing Martinez to escort her to the gate. "Take care of yourself, Michaels," he offered as he squeezed her shoulder. "I will," she said, rubbing both eyes. When she dropped her hands, he was gone. The flight home passed by in a fog of tears and turbulent emotions. Sheree replayed their last conversation over and over, searching for signs that she'd misread Wesley, that there was hope for them, despite his words. By the time she landed in Louisiana, she was emotionally exhausted but resolved. Whatever Wesley's reasons, whatever his fears, she wouldn't let his callous dismissal of her keep her on the path of depression and longing. The first few weeks back home were challenging. Sheree threw herself into her work, channeling her tumultuous emotions into her photography. She downloaded the photos she'd taken in Italy, her hands trembling as she relived the moments captured on film. The pristine beauty of Positano, the terror in the alley, the unexpected connection with Wesley. One evening, as she sorted through the images, her phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello?" she answered, her heart racing.
"Michaels," a familiar voice replied. "It's Jackson. How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," she said, surprised by the call. "Is Wesley—" "He's good," Jackson interrupted. "Recovered, back in the field. He asked me to check on you." Sheree's heart sank. He didn't want to reach out himself? "You know Drake," Jackson said, his tone carefully neutral. "Duty calls." "Right," she whispered, the disappointment sharp and sudden. "Well, tell him I said thank you. For everything." "Will do," Jackson replied. "You sure you good, Michaels?" Jackson asked. "Fine. I'm fine," she said, more forcefully than she'd intended. "You take care, Jackson." "You too, Sheree," he said, his voice soft and knowing. The line went dead, leaving Sheree alone with her thoughts and the growing certainty that Wesley had meant what he'd said, that there was no real future for them. The truth was, she wasn't fine. Not really. She jumped at every unexpected noise, checked the locks on her doors multiple times each night, and slept with the light on. But she was healing, slowly, day by day, and the thought of starting fresh, of building a new life in a place where she had no memories of fear, was what kept her going. A week later, a random knock at the door disrupted her otherwise routine weeknight. Startled, she reached for the knife she now kept on the coffee table, a habit Wesley would have approved of. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "Delivery," a muffled voice replied. "Package for Sheree Michaels." Sheree peered through the peephole, relieved to see a uniformed delivery driver holding a small box. She unlocked the door, accepting the package and signing for it, before closing and locking the door again. The box was plain, with no return address, just her name typed on a label. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, half expecting something dangerous, some remnant of the life she'd escaped. Inside, nestled in protective foam, was a small, professional-grade camera, the exact model that was destroyed during her great Positano escape. Beneath it was a folded note. Sheree opened it, her heart racing as she recognized the handwriting. "You have the eye and the integrity. Keep giving them hell. W." Tears welled in her eyes as she traced the letters with her finger. He was watching over her, still protecting her, still believing in her even as she struggled to let him go. 6 months passed in a blur of routine and healing for Sheree. The nightmares had lessened, replaced by the quiet determination to rebuild her life. She solitarily focused on her craft, using the camera Wesley had sent her to capture the raw beauty of Louisiana's bayous and the resilience of its people. The gift had been both a comfort and a torment, a reminder of the man who had saved her, then walked away. The phone call from Jackson had been the last she'd heard from Wesley's world. She had tried to move on, accepting that their connection was a product of extreme circumstances, just as he'd claimed, but her heart refused to listen, clinging to the memory of his touch, his protection, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. On a crisp autumn evening, Sheree was preparing for her first solo exhibition in a small gallery in New Orleans' French Quarter. The show, titled Resilience, featured her post-Italy work, images that spoke of survival and strength, of finding beauty in broken places. As she arranged the final photograph, a striking portrait of an elderly fisherman whose weathered face told 1,000 stories, the gallery door chimed. "We're not quite open yet," she called out without turning. "I'm not here for the art," a low voice replied. Sheree froze, her heart lurching violently. She turned slowly, afraid she was imagining things, afraid of the hope surging through her veins. Wesley stood just inside the doorway, dressed in dark jeans and a gray jacket that accentuated his broad shoulders. He looked different, leaner, harder around the edges, but his blue eyes were the same, his gaze scanning the venue with the same practiced vigilance she remembered so well. He was the same, yet different, his face etched with a new kind of weariness that spoke of battles fought and won. "Wesley," she said, her voice breathless as he approached her. "You look good," he said finally, his gaze taking in her face, her form, the changes the past 6 months had wrought. "You look tired," she countered, her tone sharper than she intended. Wesley's lips curved into a faint smile. "It's been a busy few months." "How so?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. His smile faded. "I did what I had to do. I finished what they started," he said simply, taking a step forward. "The Camorra is no more. Their operations have been dismantled, their assets seized, their leadership either incarcerated or otherwise disposed of." The operation had been codenamed Viper's Nest, and it had been the most dangerous undertaking of Wesley's career. For months, he and his team had operated in the shadows, systematically dismantling the Cassalacy clan from within. They'd gathered intelligence, turned key players, and executed precision strikes that left the organization in chaos. The final phase had been a coordinated assault on the clan's stronghold in Naples, a bloody, brutal affair that hadn't been without cost, but had ultimately succeeded in breaking the back of the Camorra's operations in southern Italy. Through it all, Wesley had kept tabs on Sheree, a professional courtesy, he told himself, a necessary precaution to ensure her safety. He'd followed her career from afar, a silent guardian watching from the shadows, watching her excel as the photographer he had always known she could be. He'd seen her bylines in major publications, her award-winning photos, and the solidification of her reputation as a fearless journalist spreading across the industry. And now, as he stood on the threshold of the gallery venue, he knew the time had come. The threat was gone, the monsters were defeated, and the man who had spent his life running toward danger
was finally ready to run towards something else, someone else. Sheree's mind reeled. You went back? After everything? I had to, he replied, closing the distance between them. It was the only way to ensure you'd truly be safe, to make it possible for us to have a life together. Sheree's breath caught. Us? There is no us, Wesley. You made that clear. I made a mistake, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I was afraid of what my world would do to you, afraid of what you would do to my world. But I've spent the last 6 months destroying the very thing I thought would destroy us, and I've come to realize something. What? She asked, her heart pounding against her ribs. The real danger wasn't the Kimura, he said, his eyes locking with hers. The real danger was losing you. The words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning and possibility. Sheree searched his face, looking for hesitation, for the fear that had driven him away before. And now? She asked, her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. And now, I'm here, he said, reaching out to brush a stray strand of hair from her cheek. His touch delivered a high-voltage current through her body, awakening all the feelings she had tried so hard to bury. I'm here because I can't stay away anymore, because I was wrong about us. Sheree, I was wrong about thinking that what we had was a product of circumstances. What I feel for you is the realest thing in my life. It was real in that Italian alley, it was real in that safe house cottage, and it's real standing here with you now. Tears welled in Sheree's eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. You hurt me when you walked away. You made me believe I didn't matter to you. You matter more than anything, he said, his thumb stroking her cheek. I thought I was protecting you by leaving, but I was just protecting myself from the possibility of losing you, from the fear that my world would eventually destroy yours. It took me months to dismantle their network, months of thinking about you every single day, to realize that the greatest danger wasn't the Kimura, it was living without you. Sheree's breath caught at his heartfelt and desperate words. The space between them seemed to shrink of its own accord, the heat emanating from each other's bodies smoldering. I missed you, she admitted, her voice breaking despite the brave face she tried to put on. Even when I hated you for leaving, I missed you. I know, he murmured, his hands moving to cup her face. I'm sorry, so sorry for the pain I caused you, but I'm here now and I'm not leaving again, not unless you tell me to. Sheree shook her head slowly, her hands coming up to cover his where they held her face. Don't leave, she whispered. Please don't leave. Wesley's eyes darkened with emotion, and he leaned closer, his breath warm against her lips. I'm done running, he said, his voice rough with desire. I'm done fighting what I feel for you. Their lips were inches apart when the gallery door chimed again, announcing the arrival of early patrons. Wesley hesitated, then took her hand, leading her toward the back office. We need privacy, he said, his voice low and urgent. The office was small, cluttered with supplies and paperwork. Wesley closed the door behind them, turning the lock with a soft click that sounded deafening in the quiet room. Her lips were his singular focus.
And the space they occupied was heady and filled with yearning. He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to turn away. She didn't. Their lips met in a tender kiss that quickly deepened, filled with months of longing and unspoken desires. Wesley's hands roamed her back, pulling her closer until there was no space between them. Sheree's fingers tangled in his hair, her body arching against his as the kiss grew more passionate, more urgent. I've dreamed of this, he murmured against her lips, his voice thick with desire. Dreamed of touching you, of holding you, of telling you how much you what? She breathed, her heart racing. How much I love you, he finished, his eyes locking with hers. I love you, Sheree. I think I have from the moment I saw you in that alley, so brave and so terrified. I love your strength, your integrity, your refusal to be broken by what happened to you. Tears welled in Sheree's eyes,
but this time she let them fall. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice thick with a choking sob. Wesley's gaze softened, his thumb stroking away her tears. "Then marry me," he said, his voice low and intense. "Marry me, Sheree. Let me spend the rest of my life making up for the months I spent away from you. Let me protect you, cherish you, love you for the rest of our days." Sheree's breath caught, her heart pounding against her ribs. "What? You want to go from perpetual bachelor to marriage?" "Yes, Sheree," he stated plainly. "Oh my gosh, I don't know what to say," she whispered, shock dancing across her face. "Say yes," he encouraged. "You can't be serious," she continued, completely frazzled by this turn of events. Instead of attempting to convince her with words, Wesley's eyes darkened with need, and he captured her lips in a searing kiss, his hands roaming her body with possessive tenderness. The kiss deepened, growing more passionate, more urgent, as months of longing and separation melted away in the heat of their reunion. "I've missed you. I love you. I want to spend my life with you," he murmured against her lips, his hands sliding down to cup her rear, pulling her flush against his growing arousal. "Marry me." Sheree moaned softly, her body responding to his touch with an eagerness that surprised her. "I've missed you," she repeated, her hands roaming his chest, feeling the hard muscles beneath his shirt. "So much." Wesley's lips trailed down her neck, his teeth nipping gently at her pulse point. "I want you," he growled against her skin, his voice rough but passionate. "Say yes, Sheree." Looking into his serious face, she nodded slightly, and he grinned. "After tonight's exhibition, I'm all yours then," she breathed, tilting her head to give him better access to her lips. Their commitment only intensified with the shorter days and the changing of the seasons. The sun was setting as it cast long shadows across the white sand beach outside their villa in the Seychelles. Sheree stood at the edge of the water, camera in hand, capturing the way the light danced on the turquoise waves. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind, pulling her back against a muscular chest. "Found you," Wesley murmured, his lips brushing against her ear. "I was beginning to think you'd prefer the company of pelicans to your new husband." Sheree leaned into his embrace, a smile playing on her lips. "The pelicans don't complain when I spend hours chasing the perfect shot." "That's because they can't do this," Wesley replied, turning her in his arms and capturing her lips in a kiss that made her toes curl in the warm sand. His hands roamed her back, pulling her closer until their bodies melded. "Wesley," she breathes when they finally parted, her heart racing. "Someone might see." "Let them look," he growled, his blue eyes dark with desire. "They should know who you belong to." Their wedding had been small and intimate, just close friends and family on a secluded beach in Louisiana. Jackson had served as Wesley's best man, standing stiffly in his dress uniform, but managing a genuine smile when they exchanged vows. O'Malley's loud and continual throat clearing that had sounded suspiciously like emotion during Sheree's vows earned him a deadly glare from Martinez and a punch in the ribs from Chen, who simply nodded respectfully throughout the ceremony. Now, as husband and wife, they were making up for lost time, exploring the boundaries of their new life together with the same intensity that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. "I was thinking," Sheree said, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, "about my next project." Wesley's brow furrowed. "You're not planning to expose any more criminal organizations, are you? Because I've had enough excitement to last a lifetime." "No, nothing like that," she laughed, her eyes sparkling. "I want to document the stories of ordinary people who faced extraordinary circumstances and survived. People like us." "People like us," Wesley repeated tenderly, his expression softening as he buried his hands in her thick hair. "I like that." Their honeymoon had been a tornado of exploration and discovery, both of the world and of each other. Each night brought new revelations, each morning deeper intimacy, as they slowly shed the armor they'd worn for so long. "Remember our first night together?" Sheree asked, her voice low as they walked back toward their villa, hand in hand. Wesley's grip tightened on her hand. How could I forget? You wore that white lace nightgown that drove me crazy. I was so nervous, she admitted, a blush creeping up her neck. I'd waited so long. And you were worth every moment of that wait, he replied, stopping to kiss her again, deeper this time, his hands tangling in her hair as he poured all the love he'd held back for so long into that one perfect moment. Their villa was perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean, its open design allowing the sea breeze to flow through the rooms. Wesley scooped Sheree into his arms as they approached the door, carrying her across the threshold like a traditional bride. "Tradition is tradition," he said when she raised an eyebrow, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Inside, the afternoon sun filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting the room in a golden glow. Wesley set her down gently, his hands lingering on her waist as he studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What is it?" she asked softly. "Just thinking how lucky I am," he replied, his voice strained. "How close I came to losing you." "But you didn't," she reminded him, her hands coming up to cup his face. "You saved me, Wesley, in more ways than one." "And you saved me," he countered, his thumb stroking her cheek. "From myself, from the loneliness, from thinking that my life was only worth what I could do for others." Their lips met again, tender at first, then growing more passionate as months of pent-up desire and love finally found their expression. Wesley's hands roamed her body, reacquainting himself with every curve, every hollow, every sensitive spot that made her gasp against his mouth. "I love you," he murmured against her lips, his tone deep and sure. "I love you too," her fingers grasping at the hair on his nape, pulling him closer. Now and always. The afternoon faded into evening, the setting sun painting the sky in tranquil hues as they explored each other with the wonder and delight of new lovers. There was a tenderness to their intimacy, a reverence that spoke of all they had endured to reach this moment. Later, as they lay tangled in the sheets, their bodies satiated and their hearts full, Sheree rested her head on Wesley's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" he asked, his fingers stroking her hair. "For coming back," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "For choosing me." "Always," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "There was never really a choice, Sheree. It was always you." As sleep began to claim them, Sheree reflected on their journey, from the terror of that Italian alley to the peace of this tropical utopia, from strangers to soulmates. They had faced danger and death, fear and uncertainty, but they had emerged stronger, their love forged against the anvil of adversity and tempered by the passage of time. The future stretched before them, unknown but not frightening. For whatever challenges they might face, they would face them together, bound by love, strengthened by experience, and secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other not just safety, but paradise.